give a warm welcome to James Grippando.
Okay. Thanks for the nice introduction, and thank you all for coming out. I've done this event several times, and we keep filling the room. So as long as you keep coming, I will keep coming back. This is my 32nd novel, but it's the 19th in the Jacks Whiteside series. Anybody who's read it knows that they're all set in South Florida, which gives us sort of that connection. And South Florida is really almost a character in the book as much as it is a setting. So it makes it extra special to write about a place I know and love. And now the guests of honors have arrived. Ken and Sandy, thank you. To see you, James. It's nice to see some familiar faces in the crowd and new faces as well. So let me tell you a little bit about Great Danger. So where did the idea come from a little bit? So this was December of 2022. My daughter's a ballet dancer, and she was dancing in the Nutcracker with Boston Ballet. So we stayed at the Fairmont Hotel in Copley Plaza, which is a big green square in the middle of the urban area down there. And we brought our dog with us, which was a lot of fun. But you can get an idea of how cold it was. That's the Boston Common. It was completely frozen over. People were ice skating. And so I took the dog out one morning early. And this is the Boston Public Library, which is, I mean, if you've ever had an idea in your mind of like the perfect library for a movie scene, I mean, that is it. It's a beautiful building. But it was 4 degrees outside, really cold. Yet Atlas, my dog, was so cold he could barely walk on the sidewalk. His feet were so cold. But I noticed from afar, this was while I was walking the dog, that there was a group of women on the front steps of the library demonstrating against something. I didn't know what, but I thought, man, it's so cold. Whatever they are demonstrating against, they must really believe in this, right? And so I walked up and discovered that they were Iranian women, and this was December of 2022, and so you may remember this event, and this beautiful young woman, Gina Masha Amini, who dared to walk on the streets of Tehran without her hair covered, and she was arrested. And so, according to the morality police that arrested her, died unexpectedly of some cardiac problem. And the charge against her was improper clothing. So, and she wasn't like walking around provocatively or anything. She just did not have her hair covered. And so, Time Magazine ended up naming her Person of the Year because of what that triggered, which was outrage. But a word about this. So I don't want to create the impression that all women in Iran are walking around, in burqas, in full covering and all of that. I mean, the law, you can take it interpret it how you want, but it does require some covering, and I put the picture up there of younger women who kind of do it in a bit of a stylish fashion, and others who do it in a more traditional fashion, but it is strictly enforced, and in the last couple of years, very strictly enforced. And so the hijab must be worn. It usually includes this headscarf and a cloak, and it's enforced by the morality police. I cannot pronounce it in Farsi, but it translates to morality police, which is, they're armed, they are an instrument of the state, and they run what are called these educational detention centers. If they arrest someone, and I don't want to make this a law course on Iranian law, but this quote from the New York Divorce and Child Custody and Inheritance, and this is what's really part of what, again, the protesters came out after the death of the young woman Amini. But it's things like this that were also wrapped up in the protests, is that, we've all heard the the battle of he said versus she said. Well, as a matter of law, in Iran, a woman's testimony only gets half the weight of a man. So, which way does the he said, she said go in that circumstance? It's pretty obvious. So it makes them very vulnerable to sexual harassment, sexual violence. If there's no witness, there's no case. So go back to September 22. I mean, the crowds were just enormous, which was pretty courageous because there was a lot of backlash to this. But people went out and they stayed in the streets and didn't just, demand justice for this young woman's family. They were demanding the end of the clerical state. So the government was facing on the brink of a revolution, really. But the protest came at a great cost. There was Masha Amini, who was killed in September 22. This young girl was dragged from a protest, and 10 days later, her body was returned to the family, and they apologized and felt so sad because she supposedly had jumped off a building. And that case was even more tragic because they forced the aunt and uncle of this young girl to go on state television and explain, how sad they were that the young girl had committed suicide. And you could hear, I don't speak Farsi, like I said, but you could, I'm told that you could hear people off camera telling the aunt and uncle exactly what to say, and they had no choice in it. In this case, this 15-year-old girl, Asra, the protest went into the schools. It wasn't just women on the streets who were courageous about this. There were young girls in schools who really joined in this movement. And the response of the government was to go into the schools and terrorize these young girls to the point where this girl simply refused to sing a pro-regime song and was beaten to death, according to the BBC. So a lot of this we didn't, I didn't follow this in real time. So don't feel guilty if you're feeling like, why didn't I know all this stuff? But I didn't either until I really researched it. Now, what was the protest about the hair, right? And that was one of the things that I wanted to get to the heart of, because this became a worldwide phenomenon, right? I mean, there were people in the United States, showing protests and cutting their hair in protest. But in Persian culture, hair is very symbolic, and some of the most ancient poems dating back thousands of years have this sort of hair as the essence to the soul. So the women cutting their hair, it was a powerful statement, powerful way to make a statement in protest, and this really caught on. But the crackdowns continued, and there were 551 people killed in these protests, over almost 20,000 arrests. And of course, the obviously the Iranian clerical regime believes in the deterrent effect of the death penalty because they stepped up executions during this time. 75% increase in the number of executions in 2022. But the part that I focused on in the research, I'm just giving you an idea of things little hooks that I grabbed onto when I'm thinking about, well, where's the book? Where's the book? This is all very interesting and shocking details, but was these internet blackouts and the restrictions on social media, which is part of the reason we didn't know about this in real time. Getting this information out of the country was not easy. It was all the government just shut down all forms of communication. And I discovered there was, what grew up was this network of women who kind of kept a low profile because what they were doing was very dangerous. And it was sort of this daisy chain of communications where, if they were firing live ammunition at protesters in some small town, somebody would text it to someone else. But obviously that would be very, very dangerous if you were caught with a cell phone at that kind of information. So the rule was, text, read it, pass it on, and then delete it. Get it off your phone. And that is the way this network worked. To the point where many experts on foreign affairs sort of really credit this kind of grassroots network of women, credit them with what beat the blackout and how information got out to the world about what was going on under this authoritarian rule. So I thought, well, that's to get into the mind of one of those women. That has to be very frightening, right? If somebody finds, now we all know, but there's very little privacy. Everybody knows. You can find, you think things are deleted, but they're not really deleted. And so that just sort of, to me, it just was took an incredibly brave person, knowing that 500 people have been killed, executions are going on, 20,000 arrests, and you're part of this network to get information out. So I had a character, right? I knew I had a character in this woman, and I named her Ava, who was part of this network. But the big question is, part of it is, I knew I was going to write I was under contract to write Jack Slide. So there was no question I was going to write a Jack Slide. So I'm like, okay, well, how does Jack fit into the story about an Iranian woman who is fighting an authoritarian regime in Tehran, by sharing text messages and so forth? Because, Jack is not Jason Bourne or James Bond, definitely not Rambo. He's a Miami criminal defense lawyer. And so that was a lot of brain power went into thinking about how is he going to fit in. So again, who is Jack, right? So I created Jack in 1994 in a book called The Pardon. At the time, he was this rebellious young lawyer. His father was the law and order governor of Florida who signed death warrants, and Jack was the criminal defense lawyer who defended death row inmates. So there was that natural father-son clash. Even though I wrote that book in 94, Jack is somewhat aged in real time. I age him about a year. So he's not 30 years older than he was, but he's about 20 years older than he was in the first. So he's in his late 40s, somewhere around there, because he was a very young lawyer, 27, 28. He's now an established criminal defense lawyer, highly regarded, married with a kid. He's married to an FBI agent. Her name is Andy Henning, which of course is a flashpoint in the story, right? Because he's defending alleged criminals, and she's working as an undercover agent, trying to put them behind bars. So there is that tension that makes for interesting storytelling. But Jack still, even after 20 years, he's not these, and you'll read a lot, and I love some of the series where it is this jaded lawyer who, who's down on the system. Jack's not one of those. Jack really does believe that even for all its flaws, it's a lot better than what they got in Iran, right? So there's some good to it, and it can't work justice if you work hard enough for everyone, guilty, not guilty, and the sweet spot, of course, when every now and then you have a client who's actually innocent. I am going to allow questions at the end, but this is the one I always get, right? Is Jack you? No, he's not at all. I mean, Jack, I mentioned the tension right out of the box in the first novel. Jack defending death row remains his father, the governor of Florida. My dad, this used to be the first line on my website. My dad just was a stripper, and of course people, right, so no, he worked for a printing company in Chicago. But I think he'd be out of a job now because this job is all done by computer now, right? So, and is Jack you again? Not really. Jack's mother died shortly after he was born. My mom, sitting right over here, and just turned 97, so she's going to be, not just, it's like 2 months now, so yeah, she still counts, the 29th of every month, only 11 months to my birthday, only 10 months to but that's a very special photograph because that was the party when I won the Harper Lee Prize. So I had the factual background. I had this idea for a woman character who was part of this network in Tehran. So now I got to start investigating the law, right? Because somehow there's got to be an issue under U.S. law here, or there's no Jack in the story. So I discovered it's a treaty called the Hague Convention. That is the Palace of name, so it's named after that. It covers a number of, there's like 99 countries that have signed on to the Hague Convention, and one of the things that the Hague Convention governs that is litigated quite frequently in U.S. courts is this issue of international child abduction. And usually it's parental child abduction, meaning it is one of the spouses flees a foreign country with the young child and goes to the United States. And very often, too often, the woman is fleeing, so they flee, take the child, and then usually it's the husband suing for return of the child under the Hague Convention. And I was very interested to find out that that's a really tough case for the mother. Because under the Hague Convention, that child has to go back unless the mother can show that returning the child to his or her native country would put the child at grave risk of physical or emotional injuries. And it has to be proven by clear and convincing evidence. It is a tough standard. But at least she doesn't have to face the law of Iran, which is the woman gets half the weight of her testimony as opposed to the man, right? So the judge it's a U.S. court that makes this determination. Great danger was born. So, the treaty actually reads grave risk. And I thought, grave risk, that's a kind of I didn't really like that title. So I took artistic license with the title and called it Grave Danger. And came up with this idea of going back to this woman of getting information out of the country. A woman flees Iran with her 5-year-old daughter. She's divorced. Jack is her lawyer, right? So now I've got my hook as to, okay, how does Jack Switek fit into this story? It's not a criminal case, which is what Jack's bread and butter is, but the case is every bit as high stakes as any criminal case he's ever had because he loses. The child is going back to Tehran. The mother, no way, she can go back, even if she wanted to. And so she'll never see that child ever again. And the child will be raised under, under the authority of the clerical regime. So, as I say, this is the typical case that arises is, more often than not, it's the mother than the father, often fleeing an abusive relationship. And this is the way the cases are often won in U.S. court, is because U.S. courts have decided that, okay, you don't have to show that the father abused the child. It puts the child at great risk of emotional injury if that child witnessed the mother being abused. So that has been sort of a breakthrough in the law that, which of course Jack learns in his research here. So, and then another twist in it was like, okay, so I've got to, I want to get all the players right here. And I thought, well, the State Department must have some role at this, especially, when you're dealing with a country like Iran. And I was surprised to find out that the State Department's no help at all to a mother in this situation. In fact, it will even go so far as to help the father find a lawyer, and will not in any way aid the mother's case. And I thought, well, why not? And the reason, I guess maybe some logical sense, as appalling as that sounds, but every hour a U.S. citizen is abducted somewhere in the United States. Right, so the State Department's view is, well, if we support, abduction going this way, what's going to happen when we demand that a U.S. child taken to Iran? We demand for that child's return. So they're in a tough spot. So they've really taken a view of, we're just not going to take a position in these cases, which is why hundreds of volunteer lawyers handle these cases. And I took the course, it's a pretty detailed training course on how to handle these cases. But that's the only way usually these fathers can have a good lawyer and have one that they can afford. It's all volunteer, it's pro bono. So during this course, this was one of the presenters. His name is Judge Denny Chen. He was a judge in the Southern District of New York. He has decided cases, but also written opinions on this that have become very, very important under the Hague Convention in these cases of child abduction. And he's like the perfect guy for it, right? Even though federal judges really get knocked about, what are they doing handling these cases? They've never seen a family law case in their lives, right? But at least this judge, Judge Chin, had a degree in psychology from Princeton, very smart guy. So he decided that under the Hague Convention, we need to adopt this flexible approach. So he literally, in one of his cases, was having a hard time deciding and invited the child into his chambers. He took off his robe, and not the judge, and sat there and just talked with the kid and asked the child to draw a picture of her family. And she left out the dad, which to him spoke volumes about what was going on in that family. He didn't decide it based on that, but it gave him an insight into what was going on. So the problem with writing the story, and I'll get into the story here, was sometimes you can be almost too topical, right? Things were changing as I was writing the story. Some things were constants, right? We have not had diplomatic relations with Iran since 1979. I'm sure, it looks like everyone in this room probably remembers. I do, when the 53 diplomats were taken hostage in the U.S. Embassy, and you had had couple on the news every night talking about, day 194 or whatever it was, right? And since 1984, Reagan administration, Iran has been declared a state sponsor of terrorism. There's only 4 on the entire list. But Iran has been on there since 1984. So those things were pretty constant, but, there was, I don't know if you remember or not, but like there been just, like about a year and a half ago, there was, 5 Americans, nobody even knew they were hostages. And suddenly you just hear that they're being released under the negotiations through the State Department. So the world was changing, as I was writing, but I kept writing. And so I came up with that Great Danger with a twist. I don't know what I was thinking when I did that slide, but anyway. So it's a little twist. Well, this is what the twist is, and I'm not giving anything up because this all happens in the first 2 chapters of the book, right? Basically. So it's not Ava, right? Jack discovers that it's actually her sister who took the child. Ava's missing. And that becomes part of the murder mystery in the case. Was she killed? Did she flee? Did she run for safety? Did the Iranian government kill her? Did the father have something to do with her disappearance? So all of that kind of plays out through Jack's investigation, facts, trying to prove that the child is going to be exposed to great danger. And then kind of overlaying all of this is, again, I mentioned that spark, Jack and his FBI agent wife, right, is suddenly, so the State Department doesn't want him to take this case. Ava and that whole family has become an international political hot potato. But for the first time in their marriage, Andy is actually trying to get Jack to drop this case. So he's wondering what's going on with that, which also creates some problems for them. So, oftentimes I get reviews that say, okay, well, this story was ripped from the headlines. And I don't ever really think of my stories as ripped from the headlines. I really, because I'm not just retelling something that happened. What I do, like in this book, Great Danger, I look for forces that are inevitably going to collide and then do what all thriller writers do, is you ask that question, what if, what if this? And so, so people ask you what James Grippando's books are like. Don't say ripped from the headlines. They're ripped from tomorrow's headlines. That's what I like to think about. So, and so with that, I'm happy to take some questions if anybody has it.
Thanks.
No.
Can you read your Josh books, not order, but like at your right date and you didn't see some information that never received it?
Yeah, there are people who love to read it strictly in order, and I get that. But I write the books assuming you've never read a previous Jack Switek. No. So this book, you won't get through, if you've not read any Jack Switek novels, you won't get through Great Danger, halfway through and say, God, I must have missed something because I didn't read this. No, it's not that kind of story at all. Each one stands alone. So,
Where did you get the name Jack Switek?
yeah, I don't know. I don't really, it was just, it's 30 years ago now. I'm not really sure where that came from, but it sounds like a good, strong name is all I can say. I mean, there is sort of I have some Czech heritage, and so, so it has, although I should have left the C out of it, right? It should have been, Tech, just T-E-K, the good tree, a Czech name, but too late for that. Yeah.
So what is your writing process like?
Question is, what's my writing process like? So, normally, well, in the big scheme, basically, for a book, I will do I do an outline, right? But first, I will usually, first thing I'll do is send my editor about 3 pages, and then we'll talk about it. And she'll think, okay, that's good. And then I'll do a full outline. And when I say an outline, it won't be like Roman numeral 1, A, B, C, and all of that. It's more like a Reader's Digest version, chapter by chapter. I mean, the outline for this book was pretty intense because the plot's complex. So, I mean, it was like a 35-page outline. And then I don't share that with my editor because that's really just working notes, right? And then but I do send her the first 100 pages, which are the hardest part of the book because there's a lot of setup in it, but people don't want to be bored in the first 100 pages with setup, saying, okay, well, I'm sure if I invest my time in this, there's going to be a payoff. No, nobody reads that way. So it has to be a page-turning 100 pages that includes the setup. And then once, my editors, she'll give me some feedback on that, and then I just finish it. And then, and the fact that it's a Jack Switek novel saves me about 4 months of work, because I don't have to invent a new character. I know the whole cast, I know his history. So I can, if I had to, I could write a Jack book in 4 months. I don't, but I could if we're pushed.
Do you write every day? Do you have...
So the daily process, no. But I do write in spurts, right? So I still practice law. And I discovered that trying to be, a lawyer half a day and a writer the other half of the day doesn't really work. So I invest myself in the practice of law. My trial, like a major development in a case, I'll just do that, and then I'll just really, really focus. Like December, I did nothing, hardly anything but write. But even though I don't practice criminal law, and I will tell it, I mean, there's been no case I've ever handled that has ended up. What do you practice? So I'm an antitrust lawyer and an entertainment lawyer. So that's yeah. So my best clients are back there. Yeah. So the entertainers in the entertainment biz. So yeah.
You say you're not really Jack Switek, but how do we know you're not just protecting your wife's identity as an FBI?
That's a great question, and you get the wise guy in Goldie Star. So, yeah.
When will this be a movie?
Yeah, well, I don't think it will be a movie. I think it would probably be more likely, or made into anything, it would be more likely like a TV series than a movie. But I'm open to either. Whenever I'm asked that question, I remember, did anybody here ever read Tim Dorsey?
Yes.
He was great. And he passed away not too long. He was a great friend, but I love it because he would always ask, so is there, any movie that's studying in the future? Says you would always answer by saying, yeah, I signed this great deal with HBO, and everybody would applaud. And he would say, yeah, for $19.99 a month, I get all the movies that I want. Yes, so you just never know. Right. Yeah.
Were you living in Miami when the Elian Gonzalez case took place?
Yeah, I was.
Living in Miami then, and I just remember it was nothing mad.
Yeah, I mean, see, now that was very, very different because that had nothing to, so Cuba is not a signatory to the Hague Convention, right? So that had yeah. So for those of you who don't remember, so basically that was the young boy who was coming over on a raft with his mother. The mother drowned, and the boy was taken in by the family, and the father in Cuba wanted the boy back. But that was not that did not find its way into the U.S. court system because Cuba does not recognize the Hague Convention. So, yeah, but that was a very different story. Jack would have no role in that story, right? That's totally diplomatic.
Janet Rita, I said, I know, think of which actions.
Right.
Right, she was in charge of.
Right. But that was through law enforcement, not really through the court system. So
When you say there's an abduction 1 hour American 1 hour every day, is that abduction of children?
no. No, not children, but that's just any abduction by anyone. And that's an average too, obviously, right? So if there, 30 people are abducted at once, it sort of spans out. So it's just to make the point that, and the point still stands, is that it puts the State Department in a bind if they say, okay, well, when somebody abducts a child in Colombia and takes the child to the United States, the child stays here, but when somebody takes the child to Colombia, we want it back. Yeah, so that's the difficulty that they have. So,
Could the Hague, the situation like that, could there be an international court so it's not country against country to try this case?
So, it's like, I could have gone in a lot of different directions with this. Yeah, the answer would be, and then, there is, so there's technically Iran is not even a signatory to the Hague Convention, right? So you've got that overlay. I got around that, like in 2 lines in the book. I figured out a way to get around that fact. But there is no international child custody court, right? So there's usually the international courts that deal with trade disputes and that sort of thing, or war crimes. But they don't really want to dip their toe into the area. It would be endless. They don't want to become, like Miami-Dade County was turned out into the family law of admission there. Yeah. So there's really no international tribunal, first of all, that would want to get into that, or secondly, that has the resources to deal with it. Yeah. Skip.
I came late, so this may have been asked, but how do you find time to practice law with all your money?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, because it is, and I teach too, and there was a time when I was writing 2 books a year. That got to be no fun at all, so I stopped that. I was either doing, writing a book, researching a book, or promoting a book, and there was really no fun, and that was one of the rules that I kept for myself from the very beginning, was to keep it fun. And writing to me is fun, but it does require some time management. And fortunately, I worked for a law firm. It didn't work. To answer your question, when I worked for Steele Lecter Davis way back in the day, it just was like, no. This was the 90s. You were expected not only to be in the office, you were expected to be there wearing a coat and tie. And presumption was that anytime I was not in the office, there was resentment, because the assumption was I was doing the book thing, right? Which was false. I could be in a deposition in Minnesota, but people would immediately assume, oh, Grippando off doing the book thing. And so that got real old. So it didn't work in the 90s, and I stopped practicing for about 8 years. And only when I went to the new firm, that sort of fancied itself to be, before there was flex time, they really had flex time. Now, since COVID, nobody goes to the office, right? Law firms, not just law firms, but everybody's having issues like, please come to the office, and there are, corporations that are docking people's pay if you don't come into the office, threatening to do so, and so forth. So now I think it would be a much easier path to have a dual career than it was. It was impossible in the 90s. To answer your question, just couldn't do it. It was, and maybe that was a good thing, because it forced me to focus on writing and establish myself as a writer. Who knows? Maybe I was on the track to be, if I kept practicing and writing, I might have ended up being both a mediocre lawyer and a mediocre writer. That's possible, right? So this way it made me just stop and really get to a point where now I don't, for example, now if I cut a page from my manuscript now, that's a lot. So I've reached a level of maturity as a writer where I really know it's working. And, maybe I wouldn't have achieved that if I'd just been, pushing the law books aside and writing the book, and then, we're pushing the book aside and dragging the law books back, so it all worked out. Yeah.
Would you say that you teach at the law school, you teach a specialized area of the law?
So I teach law and literature, which is just a 1 hour a week course, right? So, and there's only 16 people at most, usually about 12 in the class. So we'll read, well, this was interesting. So it was eye-opening for me, because I think, we actually read Presumed Innocent, which became a TV series recently, and we read To Kill a Mockingbird. But I was going to have them read Mutiny on the Bounty, because I consider that to be like the first legal thriller. And you're probably scratching your head, but think about it. If you've read the book, there's these great courtroom scenes at the end of Mutiny on the Bounty that didn't really make it that much into the movie, but they're in the book. And so I'm like talking about this, and I'm getting these blank stares. They're 25 years old, and I'm like, Mutiny on the Bounty, Fletcher Christian, Mr. Christian. They're like, never heard of it. So, yeah, so, it's, as soon as I think, so, yeah.
You indicated that you were 35 when you became a writer. How long did it take you to publish your first book?
So, so it took me 4 years to get the first book published, but that was not the first book I wrote a book for 4 years that never got published. And I had an agent who convinced me that Artie Pine was his name, and Artie goes like, Jim, you got the most encouraging rejection letters I've ever seen. And he somehow convinced me to write another book. But I put a limit on it. I wrote a book in 8 months, and that was a partner. And it sold to HarperCollins in a weekend, and gotten People magazine and the whole bit, and that was it. So that book came out in September 8th, 94, a little more than 30 years ago, even about.
Did you write your first book again? Did you ever submit your first?
Yeah, the question is, did I ever look back at that first? And the answer is yes. And I concluded there was a good reason it was never published.
Is Theo based on anyone from real life or strictly imagination?
Yeah, so she asked about Theo, and Theo is Jack's sidekick in these stories, right? So Theo has the distinction of being the only death row inmate Jack ever represented who was actually innocent. So he lives his life the way you'd expect somebody who spent 4 years on death row for a murder that they didn't commit. He's making up for last time. He's a risk taker. He's sort of, so it's this great buddy kind of concept, right? Everybody thinks that Theo is based on them. All of my friends think that oh yeah, he's such a cool guy and such a, and all that. That must be me, something else. But there are certain attributes that I might pull from people, but no, he's a work of fiction. But and it's actually that kind of ties in with a larger point, right? Is that I draw on, in the law especially, even though I don't practice, somebody asked what I practice, and I don't practice criminal law, but I still meet characters, and that's the law is rich. You see the worst and their best, right? People who really will, a courageous witness who will get on the stand and tell the truth, even though it's going to have terrible consequences. That's very courageous. On the other hand, you'll have people who will just, an oath means nothing. It's just make it up as you go along. So, yeah.
How much pressure do you have to fulfill your contract with your publisher? Because I'm sure you're aware that most people say every author has one great book, and after that, it's them.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, well, I'm pretty far down the hill. Yeah. Yeah, I've never really, I've not had writer's block in 32 novels. I had one novel that was rejected by my editor in 2006. But another publisher picked it up and published it. I guess I got the I told you so because that book did better than any book I had done previously. So.
Did you go back to the?
Oh, actually, I love her. She just retired. She was my editor for 28 years. She was wrong about that book.
Which book was that?
Called Lying with Strangers. And it's set in Boston. It's about a young, the chief resident of Boston Children's Hospital. Race research was fascinating for that book. I got to shadow the chief resident of the hospital, and she didn't like it. The writer research, it's a subjective world. So, yeah.
Why Boston?
It's a good question, but our family has traveled there on family vacation since like 92. And so I've spent a lot of time there, and I love the city, also I actually was a friend with the actual chief resident of Children's Hospital in Boston, and he invited me. So when my son was born, he spent about a couple weeks in NICU, and so I got to be close friends with David, was his name, who was the chief resident. Literally, the guy never slept. Somebody asked me about when I sleep. That guy never slept. Anytime I could call him, and ask him about my son, and he says, this would be an interesting place to set up a book. You should just come up and shadow. And I'm like, I want it.
And do you like the research as much as writing?
I do all my own research, yeah. People are sometimes surprised to hear that, but I think, I get my best ideas doing the research. The hard part about doing your own research is that you get invested in it, and I can spot it when I'm reading somebody else's book, and I say, okay, they did this research, and by God, that's going in the book, right? Even if it doesn't advance the story, that's the danger, right? Is that you're just going to shoehorn something into the story just because you did the research. That's a huge mistake. Yeah.
Who was your favorite author and why?
Who was? So, reading, I've read everything Hemingway wrote. This is going back way back. So, and I think probably his style influenced me. I'm definitely no Hemingway, but it's like that same staccato kind of style is very useful in the thriller genre. And then there are, there are a number. I'm going to try to give you some names of people maybe you haven't read. Obviously, probably read Dennis Lane. I think he's a terrific writer. Joe Zinder, I think you've ever enjoyed him. He's really good at it. I'll think of some others of you. But yeah, for sure.
FYI, I'm from Boston, thank you.
Yeah.
Hemingway.
Yeah.
J.P. Martin was this Aldous Davis.
Oh, well.
If you want to do any extra.
Yeah, thanks for that tip. I appreciate that. Yeah. Yeah.
What's the advice would you give to somebody looking to publish today, whether you self-publish, getting an agent, route you went, like if you were to do it today?
Yeah. So, my advice, unfortunately, is really stale on that, because I have had the same literary agent since 1992. And HarperCollins has been my only publisher since 1994. So I haven't really had the experience of looking around as to how to do it. Now, I do know from what I hear from other people is that, and this is just sad reality is that what really helps is the social media following, right? Because a publisher isn't going to, when Department launched, I went 17 days on, a book tour, like 15 different cities, boom, 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 going, and there were full-page ads and that sort of thing. Publishers don't do that. They expect you to have that sort of platform yourself. So, for better or worse, that's kind of where we are now. Whether you need a publisher or not, I think you do need a publisher unless you are a known name. That's just my impression, right? Colleen Hoover exploded over TikTok, right? She was an unknown, but for every Colleen Hoover, there's literally 1 million books a year published, self-published on Amazon.
She just took herself off of the media, calling a show that's on television that there's some legal stuff going on.
Oh, I didn't know about that. So, yeah. My daughter would know about that. She's more of a Colleen Hoover fan. Honestly, I've never read Colleen. But I'm just used to it. Yeah.
Jim, your descriptions of the locations are so very detailed, and I have to believe that you've spent a lot of time there, like Jenny Springs, Miami, and every place that you've been. Have you spent a lot of time in all those places?
I do try to go to places, right? And I think that's important. And I talk to all the time. I talk to high school students, I talk to, and so forth that want to be writers, and they all think they can get everything on their phone. First of all, you're never going to get a feel for a place that informs the description. And the other thing you'll never pick up is an ear for dialogue. How do people talk, to each other? It's a lot different, in the South than it is from, somewhere in Boston or whatever, right? So it's important to go. That was obviously a huge hurdle with Great Danger. I wasn't going to go to Tehran. Getting there was 10% of the problem. Getting out of there was 90% of the problem, right? You don't. So this book, in that sense, is the exception rather than other than the Miami studies for him. So. I think I'm going to sign some books if you're interested and support the book tour.